The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp pavement and distant wood smoke. Jonathan Pierce walked steadily along the quiet streets of Ridgewood, the faint glow of streetlights stretching his shadow across the sidewalk. It had been a long day, a battle in the courtroom, endless depositions. Another step in a case that could shake the very core of the justice system. His leather briefcase felt heavier than usual, not from its contents, but from the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. As he turned the corner, the unmistakable red and blue flash of police lights painted the empty street in streaks of color. A low hum of an idling cruiser filled the silence. Jonathan slowed his pace, instinctively straightening his posture. He had spent years inside courtrooms fighting for justice now. Justice was staring him down from behind a badge. The driver's door swung open. Officer Logan Mitchell stepped out, moving with the easy arrogance of a man who had never questioned his own authority. His uniform was crisp, his gun belt hanging heavy on his waist. From the passenger side, Officer Eric Dawson, younger and visibly hesitant, mirrored his partner's stance but lacked his confidence. "Evening," Mitchell drawled, his eyes sweeping over Jonathan with quiet scrutiny. "What brings you out here this late?" Jonathan met his gaze evenly. "Walking home." Mitchell exchanged a quick glance with Dawson before folding his arms. "That's so." He took a step closer, tilting his head slightly. "We got a report of a break-in a few blocks over." "You fit the description." Jonathan inhaled slowly. There it was. The old, familiar game of vague accusation, a manufactured justification. It didn't matter that he was in a tailored suit, that his briefcase was full of legal documents, that his name was known in every courthouse in the state. All Mitchell saw was a black man on an empty street. Jonathan's voice remained measured. "And what exactly is that description?" Mitchell's smirk widened. "A man. Dark clothing. About 6 feet tall." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "That's half the men in Ridgewood." Mitchell chuckled, glancing at Dawson, who shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. "Mind telling us what's in the briefcase?" Jonathan adjusted his grip. "Legal documents." Mitchell nodded slowly, stepping even closer. "Mind if I take a look?" Jonathan had seen this play before, and he knew exactly how it ended. Jonathan Pierce could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had argued countless cases about wrongful arrests, systemic bias, and abuse of power. But now, standing beneath the flickering glow of the streetlights, he was living it. Officer Logan Mitchell took another step forward, his smirk unwavering. "Come on. Let's make this easy," he said, nodding toward Jonathan's briefcase. "You wouldn't be hiding anything, would you?" Jonathan exhaled slowly. "Unless you have probable cause or a warrant, I believe I have the right to my personal property." Mitchell let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "Oh, you believe you do? That's cute." Before Jonathan could react, Mitchell snatched the briefcase from his grasp, flipping it open with an exaggerated motion. "Legal briefs. Court documents. Case notes." The officer's smirk faltered for half a second before he quickly covered it with feigned amusement. "Huh. Looks real official." He thumbed through a few pages, then glanced at Officer Eric Dawson, who lingered behind, clearly uneasy. "What do you think, Dawson? A little too neat, don't you think?" Dawson hesitated. His fingers twitched near his duty belt, but he said nothing. His silence was compliance, and Jonathan knew it. Jonathan squared his shoulders. "I've done nothing wrong. I've complied with your questions. I'm a prosecutor for this state." Mitchell's expression darkened. Something about that word prosecutor irritated him. "A lawyer, huh?" He snapped the briefcase shut and tossed it onto the hood of the squad car. "Well, counselor, that doesn't put you above the law." "I never said it did," Jonathan replied evenly. Mitchell's smirk returned. "Good. Then you won't mind if we do a little check." Jonathan's patience thinned. "If you're accusing me of something, then charge me. If not, I'll be on my way." The words barely left his mouth before Mitchell grabbed his wrist and yanked it behind his back. Jonathan stiffened as the cold metal of handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. A jolt of pain shot through his shoulder as Mitchell forced his arms into position. "You're under arrest for resisting an officer," Mitchell growled. Jonathan let out a slow breath, containing his fury beneath a mask of icy composure. He had seen this tactic too many times: agitate, escalate, dominate. Dawson shifted uneasily. "Mitchell, maybe we should radio it in," Mitchell snapped. Dawson hesitated, then reluctantly reached for his radio. "Dispatch, we have a suspect in custody." His voice was quieter than before. Jonathan stood perfectly still as Mitchell patted him down, his movements rough and unnecessary. There was no gun, no drugs, no stolen property, because there had never been a crime to begin with. Still, Mitchell shoved him forward. "Let's take a ride." The squad car door swung open, and Jonathan was pushed inside, his wrists pressing uncomfortably against his lower back. Mitchell climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting the mirror to smirk at Jonathan through the partition. "You're real quiet now, lawyer. Not gonna argue your way out of this one." Jonathan met his gaze, his voice low but unwavering. "I don't need to argue." Mitchell scoffed. "Yeah? And why's that?" Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes piercing through the glass. "Because the truth has a way of catching up." Mitchell's smirk flickered for the briefest moment before he turned away, gripping the wheel a little tighter. The engine rumbled to life. The cruiser pulled away. As the city lights blurred past the window, Jonathan sat back, calm despite the cuffs biting into his skin. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't defeated. He was preparing. Because this fight had only just begun. The air inside the Ridgewood Police Department was thick with the stale scent of old coffee and disinfectant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the booking area, where Jonathan Pierce now stood, his wrists still bound in cold steel, his dignity intact. Officer Logan Mitchell strolled in behind him, brimming with the confidence of a man who had never faced consequences. Officer Eric Dawson, on the other hand, hovered near the entrance, his discomfort growing by the second. Behind the counter, the booking officer, a graying man in his 50s, raised an eyebrow at Jonathan before glancing at Mitchell. "Charges?" Mitchell smirked. "Burglary. Resisting arrest. Suspicion of possession of stolen property." Jonathan exhaled slowly. There it was. They were fabricating a case against him in real time, twisting reality into whatever shape suited their narrative. The booking officer hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. "You sure about this, Mitchell?" "He doesn't look like." Mitchell's smirk deepened. "Didn't realize we were judging suspects by their wardrobe now. Last I checked, criminals don't wear name tags." Jonathan locked eyes with him. "And last I checked, the law requires evidence." Mitchell's smirk faltered just for a second, but he recovered quickly, yanking Jonathan forward. "Let's move this along." Jonathan's wallet, phone, and briefcase were confiscated, each item tossed into a plastic bin with casual disregard. Mitchell opened the briefcase once more, flipping through the legal documents, depositions, and notes for an upcoming corruption case. His expression darkened slightly. He recognized some of those names. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. He turned to the booking officer. "Make sure his fingerprints and mugshot are on file." Jonathan's patience was razor thin, but he remained composed. "You realize this is illegal, right? You have no probable cause, no evidence, and no crime." Mitchell's smirk returned. "That's for the courts to decide." Jonathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You have no idea who you just arrested." Mitchell's face tightened. He leaned in, his voice low. "You think I give a damn who you are? You think your fancy law degree makes you untouchable?" Jonathan met his gaze, unwavering. "No. But the truth does." Mitchell straightened, scoffing. "We'll see about that." With that, Jonathan was led down a dimly lit hallway, past rows of holding cells filled with men who had long since given up on justice. A heavy steel door creaked open, revealing a small, cold cell peeling paint, a metal bench, and nothing else. The door clanged shut behind him. Through the bars, Jonathan could hear Mitchell's voice from the hallway, dripping with arrogance. "Another one off the streets," he chuckled. Jonathan sat down, his hands clenched into fists. Mitchell thought this was over. He was wrong. The cold metal bench dug into Jonathan Pierce's back, but he barely noticed. His mind was racing, analyzing every move like a chess match. Mitchell thought he had won, but he had made one crucial mistake: he underestimated the man he arrested. Hours passed. The dim light in the cell flickered, the faint sounds of officers chatting and distant phone calls echoing through the station. Then, a guard approached. "You got a call," he muttered, unlocking the door and leading Jonathan to a small holding room with a phone bolted to the wall. Jonathan picked it up, his voice steady. Lisa. On the other end, Lisa Carmichael, his lead assistant, wasted no time. Jonathan, we're already on it. I pulled the ATM footage from the gas station, 2 blocks from your office, times tamped. Clear as day. You weren't anywhere near that so-called burglary. Jonathan allowed himself a small smirk. Good. Now tell me you have the squad car audio. Lisa hesitated, then exhaled. I had to call in a few favors, but yes. It's worse than we thought. Jonathan's grip tightened around the receiver. How bad? She didn't hold back. Mitchell knew you weren't a suspect. He literally says, just make it look legitimate. We have it all recorded. Jonathan's jaw clenched. That was it. The evidence that would not only clear his name, but burn Mitchell's career to the ground. Get everything together, Jonathan instructed. I want Judge Calloway at the precinct within the hour. No delays. Lisa didn't hesitate. Already called him. He's on his way. Jonathan hung up, took a slow breath, and steeled himself for what came next. 1 hour later, the station doors slammed open. Lisa Carmichael stormed in first. A thick legal folder in one hand, a signed court order in the other. Behind her, Judge Raymond Calloway, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench, entered with a grim expression. The moment they appeared, the entire precinct fell silent. At the front desk, Officer Mitchell's smirk wavered. Lisa didn't wait for an invitation. She slapped the folder onto the desk, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is a formal demand for the immediate release of Jonathan Pierce. Mitchell scoffed. And who exactly do you think you are? Judge Calloway stepped forward. She's his attorney. And I am the one who signed this order. Mitchell paled. Lisa continued, voice sharp as a blade. Not only do we have video evidence placing him miles away from the alleged crime scene, but we also have a squad car recording. Mitchell tried to brush it off. Recordings get taken out of context. Lisa pressed play. Through the tinny speakers, Mitchell's own voice echoed through the station. Just make it look legitimate. A heavy silence fell over the room. Dawson swallowed hard, shifting nervously. The station officers turned toward Mitchell, their expressions darkening. Jonathan stepped forward from his cell, calm but unshaken. Mitchell scowled, but his confidence was unraveling. You're bluffing. Lisa smirked. Try me. Judge Calloway's voice was like a gavel striking wood. Release him. Now. Mitchell hesitated, but he had lost. He reached for the keys with a clenched jaw and unfastened Jonathan's cuffs. Jonathan rolled his shoulders, then locked eyes with Mitchell. You just made the biggest mistake of your career, he said evenly. Mitchell didn't respond. Jonathan straightened his suit and walked toward the exit, Lisa at his side. But he wasn't just walking away, he was preparing for war. This wasn't over. Not even close. The Ridgewood County Courthouse was packed. Every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters, legal professionals, and curious onlookers, all eager to witness a trial that had become the talk of the state. A wrongful arrest was one thing, but a wrongful arrest of the chief prosecutor? That was an entirely different level of scandal. At the prosecution's table, Officer Logan Mitchell sat with his arms crossed. His confidence still intact, at least on the surface. Beside him, Officer Eric Dawson shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Across from them sat District Attorney Rachel Sterling, a no-nonsense prosecutor who had built her career on a tough-on-crime stance. But today, even she seemed uneasy. And then, Jonathan Pierce walked in. The energy in the room shifted. He was no longer a man in handcuffs, no longer a suspect. He was exactly where he belonged in the courtroom. But this time, standing as his own defense. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had already won. The judge banged the gavel. Mr. Pierce, I understand you'll be representing yourself? A murmur spread through the gallery. Jonathan nodded. That's correct, Your Honor. At the prosecution table, Mitchell's smirk faltered. De Sterling straightened, caught off guard. This wasn't part of their script. The case begins. Jonathan opened with precision. First, he presented time-stamped footage from a nearby ATM, proving beyond any doubt that he was miles away from the alleged crime scene. The screen flickered as crystal-clear video showed him leaving his office downtown, briefcase in hand, just minutes before the so-called break-in. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Then came the bombshell. Jonathan turned to the judge. Your Honor, I request permission to play an audio recording from the squad car of Officers Mitchell and Dawson on the night of my arrest. Rachel Sterling stood quickly. Objection. Overruled, the judge said, motioning for the recording to be played. The courtroom fell silent as the audio crackled through the speakers. Then, Mitchell's own voice filled the room. Just make it look legitimate. The reaction was instant. Gasps. Murmurs. A visible shift in power. Jonathan turned to Dawson, his voice steady. Officer Dawson, do you still stand by your report? Dawson hesitated. His hands trembled. Then, finally, he cracked. It wasn't right, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Mitchell told me to make it up. The courtroom erupted. Mitchell jumped to his feet. He's lying. Jonathan remained seated, completely still. He didn't need to say another word, the case had already fallen apart. Judge Calloway leaned forward, eyes narrowing at Mitchell. You better choose your next words carefully. Officer. Rachel Sterling sighed, rubbing her temples. She knew it was over. The state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Pierce, she announced, her voice lacking its usual sharpness. The judge nodded, then turned to Jonathan. Mr. Pierce, you are free to go. But Jonathan wasn't done yet. He stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, before walking toward the bench. He handed the judge a thick folder. What's this? The judge asked. Jonathan turned, his voice ringing through the courtroom. Before I was falsely arrested, before these officers fabricated charges against me, I was preparing for a case. A corruption case. A hush fell over the room. Jonathan's gaze locked onto Mitchell. That case was against Officer Logan Mitchell. The room exploded into chaos. Mitchell's face went sheet white. This is a setup, he barked, his bravado slipping. Jonathan tilted his head. No, officer. This is justice. The judge's voice was sharp. Mitchell, you're now under investigation for misconduct. The gavel slammed down. Mitchell was finished. But Jonathan was just getting started. The courtroom buzzed with shock and disbelief. The revelation that Officer Logan Mitchell had been under investigation for corruption, even before he orchestrated Jonathan Pierce's arrest, sent shockwaves through the gallery. Journalists scrambled to take notes, their pens flying across their notepads. This wasn't just a wrongful arrest anymore, it was a takedown. Mitchell's face twisted with rage. This is a damn setup, he bellowed, rising from his chair, his voice cracking under pressure. This is a personal vendetta, and he's using the system to take me down. Jonathan remained unmoved, his gaze steady. No, officer, he said, his voice like steel. You took yourself down. Judge Calloway's gavel slammed down, silencing the commotion. He turned to Rachel Sterling, his expression grave. Given the evidence and the officer's behavior, does the prosecution still wish to proceed with the case against Mr. Pierce? Sterling, now visibly frustrated, let out a slow breath. Your Honor, the state formally moves to dismiss all charges. The gavel struck again. Charges dismissed. The gallery erupted. Spectators whispered, some shaking their heads, others nodding in approval. A wrongful arrest had turned into the exposure of systemic corruption. Mitchell's downfall. But it wasn't over. As the room quieted, Jonathan wasn't finished. He took a step toward the judge. Your Honor, I also move to submit a formal complaint against Officer Logan Mitchell. He turned, scanning the room. His abuse of power does not stop with me. It is a pattern that has destroyed lives, ruined cases, and tarnished the integrity of this very system. Mitchell barked out a laugh, though there was no confidence left in it. Oh, please. You think you can just have me fired? Jonathan held up the thick folder he had submitted earlier. You've been under investigation for months, officer. This arrest was just the final nail in the coffin. Judge Calloway turned to the bailiff. I want Internal Affairs notified immediately. Mitchell's mask finally cracked. His breathing turned ragged, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He had walked into the courtroom believing he was untouchable. Now, he was unraveling in front of everyone. Logan Mitchell, Calloway said, voice heavy with authority, as of this moment, you are suspended pending a full investigation into your misconduct. You are also advised to remain available for questioning regarding previous cases that may have been impacted by your actions. The blood drained from Mitchell's face. You can't do this. He spat, but no one was listening anymore. The tide had turned. the ones who chose justice. At the prosecution table, Officer Eric Dawson sat frozen, watching his mentor fall apart. Jonathan turned to him. "Officer Dawson," he said calmly, "I'm giving you one last chance. The system gives you two choices: protect corruption, or stand for justice. Which do you choose?" The entire room turned to Dawson. His hands trembled in his lap. And then he took a breath and stood. His voice faltered, but he swallowed hard and found his courage. "I want to make things right." Jonathan nodded. "Then start now." Dawson turned to the judge. "I'm willing to cooperate in the investigation against Mitchell." A final blow. Mitchell slammed his fist against the table. "You coward." Judge Calloway leaned forward. "Officer Mitchell, I suggest you sit down before you add contempt of court to your list of problems." Mitchell dropped back into his chair, seething. But it was over. Jonathan took a slow breath. The battle was won. Justice was finally restored. The Ridgewood County Courthouse steps were packed with reporters. Their microphones and cameras pointed toward Jonathan Pierce as he emerged from the building. The moment he stepped outside, the crowd erupted in questions, voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. "Mr. Pierce, how does it feel to be vindicated? What's next for Officer Mitchell? Do you believe this case will lead to broader police reform?" Jonathan raised a hand, and the crowd fell silent. He took a moment, scanning the sea of faces before him. This wasn't just about his case anymore. "This isn't just about me," he said, his voice steady but firm. "This is about a system that allows injustice to thrive. A system that protects those who abuse their power, while punishing those who dare to challenge it." The weight of his words settled over the crowd. "I was lucky," Jonathan continued. "I had resources. I had legal knowledge. But how many others have been falsely accused, arrested without cause, or had their voices silenced because they didn't have the means to fight back?" The murmurs of agreement spread through the onlookers. This was bigger than one case. The consequences in the days following the trial: Officer Logan Mitchell was officially fired from the Ridgewood Police Department. Further investigations revealed a pattern of misconduct, spanning years, dozens of cases thrown into question. Multiple wrongful arrests exposed. He now faced federal charges for civil rights violations, perjury, and falsifying police reports. Officer Eric Dawson, though complicit in Jonathan's arrest, had fully cooperated with investigators, testifying against Mitchell and exposing systemic failures within the department. In exchange, he was given a second chance, placed under probation, reassigned to desk duty, and ordered to complete mandatory ethics training. But the impact didn't stop at Ridgewood. Governor Elliott Harrison called a press conference, acknowledging the national attention the case had garnered. Under mounting public pressure, he announced a statewide police reform initiative, including mandatory body cameras for all officers, stricter penalties for falsified reports, independent review boards to investigate misconduct claims. The policy was dubbed the Pierce Protocol. Jonathan hadn't just cleared his name. He had changed the system. A new mission. Weeks later, Jonathan sat in his office, a stack of letters on his desk, messages from people who had been victims of the same system that tried to crush him. Some were looking for legal help. Others simply wanted to share their stories. He picked up a letter from a mother whose son had been wrongfully convicted, her words filled with desperation and hope. Jonathan exhaled slowly. His fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. As he stood and grabbed his briefcase, his assistant Lisa smiled. "Where to?" she asked. Jonathan buttoned his suit jacket, his resolve stronger than ever. "To work," he said. He stepped out of his office, ready to take on the next battle. Today, justice had won. Tomorrow, the fight continued. Jonathan Pierce's story is more than just a courtroom victory. It's a powerful reminder that justice is never guaranteed but must be fought for. Many people, especially those who have lived through decades of societal change, understand that corruption thrives in silence. Jonathan's battle shows that truth, persistence, and courage can expose even the most deeply rooted injustice. The system may be flawed, but it is not unchangeable. His journey teaches us that one voice can make a difference. He was not just fighting for himself, he became a force for systemic reform, ensuring that future generations wouldn't face the same abuse of power. For older generations, this story is a call to never stop standing up for what is right. Whether through mentorship, voting, or supporting policies that promote fairness, we all have a role in shaping a just society. Ultimately, Jonathan's fight proves one undeniable truth: justice may take time, but with perseverance, it will always prevail. If his story inspires you, remember, change begins when good people refuse to stay silent. Jonathan Pierce's journey is a testament to the power of truth, resilience, and the fight for justice. No one is above the law, but no one should be beneath it either. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can share more powerful stories of courage, justice, and the fight for what's right.